across the forests and lakes of America, those places where summer camps sit tucked away from towns and cell towers, where cabins glow softly beneath the trees and the water turns black after sunset, there are things people don't talk about openly. Creatures said to live just beyond the firelight, watching from the tree line or stirring beneath still water. Shapes that move between cabins, whispers that drift across the lake, and something unseen that follows the sound of children laughing too late into the night. People call them camp legends, but counselors and campers swear they've heard footsteps outside the bunks, something moving beneath the docks, and breathing where no one should be after lights out. Some say they're just stories, but what if they aren't? Tonight, we explore 4 terrifying summer camp creature encounters, stories of isolated cabins, quiet lakes, and wooded trails where something stepped out of the darkness and came too close to the camp. In the end, you'll have to decide if you believe. Welcome to Whispers After Dark, where shadows speak and the night listens. Before we begin, take a moment to like, subscribe, tap the notification bell, and leave a comment telling us where you're listening from. And if you ever heard something move through the woods or the water while staying at a summer camp, tell us your story. Now settle in, let the night insects hum and the lake grow still, and drift towards sleep as we begin 4 terrifying summer camp creature encounters, where the rules exist for a reason, and the dark is always listening. Summer camps are built in quiet places for a reason. Deep woods, still water, narrow trails where sound carries too far at night, and light never quite reaches the ground. Every camp has rules meant to keep kids safe, and every camp has one rule no one can fully explain. This story comes from a place like that, where the water stays dark even at noon, and the dock creaks like it remembers too much. Our first story comes from a listener we'll call Anna, who shared this experience exactly as it happened to her, and I'll be reading it just as she wrote it. It takes us to a small girls' summer camp tucked deep into the piney woods of eastern Texas, built around a narrow lake surrounded by towering pines and slow-moving water. The camp had been there since the 1950s, long before safety regulations and renovations, and some parts of it were older than the counselors themselves. The dock was one of those parts. Weathered boards, rusted bolts, and wooden supports so dark with age they looked almost black beneath the surface. The rule was simple and repeated every summer without explanation. Don't swim under the dock. I was 22 that summer, working as a junior counselor while finishing my teaching degree. The camp was quiet compared to others I'd worked at, smaller and more isolated, the kind of place where the nights felt heavier than they should. The lake sat perfectly still most evenings, reflecting the trees and sky like glass. During the day, the water was warm near the surface, but colder than expected once you waded out past the rope line. At night, it turned opaque and black, swallowing moonlight and sound alike. The campers treated the rule like a dare. By the second week, whispers had started spreading between cabins about girls who swam under the dock and came back pale and shaky. Some claimed something brushed their legs. Others said their hair had been tugged, slow and deliberate, as if fingers were testing its texture. One girl swore she felt a hand wrap around her ankle and let go only when she kicked hard enough to break the surface. The counselors laughed it off at first. Cold water, old boards, overactive imaginations fed by campfire stories. Until one camper refused to go near the lake at all. She was 12, small for her age, quiet even before that night. I found her sitting alone on the steps of the mess hall after breakfast, knees pulled tight to her chest, staring toward the trees. When I asked what was wrong, she told me she'd gone under the dock during free swim. She said the water was colder there, so cold it burned, and that the space beneath the boards felt smaller than it should have. She said something had moved below her, not fast, not aggressive, just rising slowly, like it was curious. When she surfaced, her hair was tangled with strands of green-black algae that didn't belong in the lake. That afternoon, I went to check the dock myself. The lake was quiet, the kind of quiet that makes you aware of every sound the body makes. Cicadas buzzed in the trees, their rhythm rising and falling like breathing. The dock groaned softly as I knelt, the boards warm under my palms from the sun. I slipped into the water near the ladder and swam along the side, keeping one hand on the wood. The water darkened quickly beneath me, turning from brown-green to black within a few feet. When I ducked under, the world narrowed to shadows and pressure. That was when I saw the underside of the dock. Deep scratches ran along the support beams, long and uneven, gouged into the wood at angles that suggested something had been pulling itself upward from below. The marks weren't fresh, but they weren't old either. Some had splintered edges. Others were smooth, worn down by time and water. I felt a sudden tightening in my chest, an instinctive warning that made my limbs feel heavy. I surfaced quickly, heart pounding, and climbed back onto the dock, trying to convince myself it was turtles or old damage from storms. That night, the lake wouldn't settle. From the counselor cabin, I could hear water lapping softly against the shore, even though there was no wind. The dock creaked at irregular intervals, boards shifting as if weight moved across them and paused. Every so often, there was a faint splash, not loud enough to draw attention, just enough to register in the back of my mind. When I stepped outside to check, the lake lay flat and dark, reflecting the stars like nothing had disturbed it at all. Sometime after midnight, I woke to the sound of something scraping wood, slow, heavy, repetitive. I sat up and listened, my skin prickling as the sound drifted closer, then stopped. The air felt damp and thick, carrying the smell of stagnant water and wet rot. From my window, I could see the dock just barely outlined in moonlight. The boards near the far end dipped slightly, then rose again, as if something beneath them had shifted its grip. A moment later, the water beside the dock rippled outward in perfect circles. I didn't see it clearly. I didn't need to. A shape moved beneath the surface, long and dark, gliding just below the waterline. Something pressed upward against the underside of the dock, wood groaning in response. For a brief moment, a pale form broke the surface near one of the support beams before sinking back into the black. I felt the unmistakable sense of being watched, of something knowing I was there, even though I stood far from the water. The next morning, the camp director closed the lake indefinitely. No explanation was given to the campers. The dock was roped off and eventually dismantled piece by piece. When the supports were pulled from the water, more scratches were revealed along their length, deeper the farther down they went. No one ever said what made them. The camp shut down 2 years later. I still think about that lake sometimes, about the way the water moved without wind, about the space beneath the dock that felt too tight, too deliberate. I don't know what lived there, and I don't want to. But I do know one thing. Rules like that exist for a reason. And if you ever find yourself at a quiet lake, staring at an old wooden dock after dark, remember this one. Don't swim under it. Some summer camps don't close because enrollment drops or funding runs out. Some close quietly, without announcements or explanations, leaving only locked gates and unanswered questions behind. This story comes from a place like that, where the woods grew too close and the nights lasted longer than they should have. Our next story comes from a listener we'll call David, who spent 4 summers working as a counselor at a boys' camp in northern Michigan. He shared this experience exactly as it happened to him, and I'll be reading it just as he wrote it. This is his story about the final week at Camp Alderwood, and the night something in the woods came too close. Camp Alderwood sat at the edge of a state forest, miles from the nearest town, surrounded by dense stands of pine and birch that blocked out most of the sky once the sun dropped. During the day, the camp felt normal enough. Canoes pulled up along the shoreline, laughter drifting from the ball fields, counselors shouting reminders about sunscreen and hydration. But at night, the forest pressed in tight, swallowing sound and light alike. The trees stood so close together that the darkness between them felt solid, like something you could lean against. The change started during the last week of the season. It wasn't dramatic at first, just small things that felt off once you noticed them. The woods went quiet earlier than usual in the evenings. The usual hum of insects faded into long stretches of silence. Campfires burned lower, as if the air itself didn't want to feed them. A few of the younger campers complained about hearing footsteps near their cabins after lights out, but we chalked it up to nerves and homesickness. Then the director changed the rules. Cabins were locked at night for the first time in the camp's history. Counselors were told to keep campers inside after dusk, even during evening activities. Night hikes were canceled. So were campfire stories. When we asked why, the director only said there had been incidents in the woods and that we needed to be cautious until the end of the season. No one explained what those incidents were. By midweek, everyone felt it. The pressure, the sense of being watched. When you walked between cabins after dark, your footsteps sounded too loud on the gravel paths, echoing into the trees. Flashlights seemed weaker than they should have been, their beams swallowed after just a few yards. More than once, I caught movement between the trunks, tall shapes slipping back when the light swung their way. I never saw anything clearly enough to describe, but I always felt it watching, waiting for the beam to move on. The final night came with a heavy, unsettled stillness. The sky hung low and overcast, pressing the camp into a narrow pocket of light. During head count, one of the counselors didn't report in. At first, we assumed he was delayed or dealing with a homesick camper. 10 minutes passed, then 20. The director's voice grew tight over the radio as he asked us to keep the campers inside while a search was organized. We found his flashlight first, lying just beyond the edge of the maintenance road where it met the woods. The beam was still on, aimed upward into the branches. A few steps farther in, we found his boot, then his jacket, then nothing else. No tracks, no signs of a struggle, just the forest, standing silent and unmoved, as if it had swallowed him whole. That was the night the woods came closer. As we gathered the campers inside, something began moving beyond the cabins. Heavy footsteps paced the perimeter, slow and deliberate, stopping just outside the range of the porch lights. The sound wasn't rushed or frantic. It moved like it knew exactly where everything was. Every now and then, something brushed the cabin walls, testing them. A shadow passed across one of the windows, tall and narrow, blocking out the dim light inside before sliding away again. No one slept. At dawn, buses arrived early. Campers were packed up without explanation and sent home hours ahead of schedule. The director told us the camp would not be reopening the following summer. There was no closing ceremony, no final campfire, just silence and hurried goodbyes. A few of us stayed to clean up and help feed the search party. 2 days later, they found his body, or what was left of it. The camp director was called in to identify the remains. We waited outside his office while the rangers unzipped the body bag. The look on his face is something I'll never forget. When he finally came back out, he didn't say a word. He sat down on the steps, pale and shaking, staring at nothing. After a long moment, he looked up at us and said only this: "No animal did that. Whatever killed him was something far worse." Camp Alderwood shut down within a month. Years later, when I looked into it, I learned there was no official reason listed. No accidents, no lawsuits, no funding issues. Just a quiet closure and a locked gate at the edge of the forest. But I remember that last night too clearly to believe it was coincidence. The camp didn't close because something went wrong. It closed because whatever lived in those woods finally came close enough that no one could pretend it wasn't there anymore. Some lakes never seem to move, no matter how much wind passes over them. The surface stays flat, dark, and heavy, like something beneath is holding the water still. This story comes from a place like that, where the lake looks calm but never truly rests. Our next story comes from a listener we'll call Joseph, who shared this experience exactly as it happened to him, and I'll be reading it just as he wrote it. This is his story about Mirror Lake and the summer when the water gave something back. Mirror Lake sat at the center of the camp like a dark eye, ringed by tall pines and old wooden docks that creaked even on calm days. During daylight hours, it looked harmless enough. Canoes drifted across the surface, campers splashed near the shoreline. Sunlight shimmered just deep enough to hide how quickly the lake dropped away into cold darkness. But after sunset, the water changed. It turned opaque and black, swallowing reflections instead of returning them. Even the frogs fell silent, as if sound itself died the moment it touched the surface. The rule was clear and repeated every night. No swimming after dark. No exceptions. Officially, the explanation was cold currents and poor visibility. Unofficially, longtime staff whispered about campers who came back from the water shaken and pale, unable or unwilling to explain what they had felt beneath the surface. Joseph admitted he laughed at those stories at first. Lifeguards always did, until the reports started piling up. It began with small things. Campers complaining that something brushed their ankles near the dock. A slow tug at the leg just strong enough to make them stumble. Shadows slipping beneath the buoy line when no one else was in the water. Joseph started taking late patrols around the lake, his flashlight beam skimming the surface. More than once, he noticed ripples spreading outward in perfect circles, even when the air was still and the shoreline silent. Each time, the ripples stopped the moment his light touched them. The lake felt aware. The night a camper went missing was warm and windless. The sky was clear. The stars reflected so sharply on the water, it looked like another sky had opened beneath the dock. Joseph heard the splash from across the grounds and knew immediately it wasn't an accident. It wasn't frantic. It wasn't loud. Just a single deliberate sound, like someone slipping quietly into the lake on purpose. By the time searchlights swept the shoreline, the water had already gone still again. Divers went down near the dock and farther out past the buoy line. They found nothing. No footprints, no clothing, no sign of a struggle. The lake absorbed movement and sound alike, giving nothing back but silence. Fear spread through the cabins like smoke, thick and hard to breathe. Parents were called, authorities arrived, and still the water remained empty. Until morning. Joseph was standing on the dock when he saw something floating near the reeds on the far side of the lake. At first he thought it was debris. Then the shape turned, slow, careful, and he realized it was a body. The boy lay face up in the water, eyes open, skin pale and unmarked, as though he'd never struggled at all. He wasn't cold. He wasn't floated. It looked like he'd simply been placed there. When they pulled him from the water, the boy coughed once. Officially, he survived. But Joseph said something was wrong immediately. The boy didn't cry, didn't ask where he was, didn't react when his parents arrived in a panic. He stared straight ahead, mouth slightly open, breathing shallow and slow. When he finally spoke, his voice was flat and toneless, the words delivered without emotion or inflection. He didn't say he was scared. He didn't say he was hurt. He just said the lake was quiet now. His parents took him home that afternoon. They didn't stay to answer questions. The camp shut down before the next season. The docks were dismantled. The trail leading to the shoreline was blocked off. Officially, it was funding issues, safety concerns, liability. But Joseph knew better. He remembered the way the boy's reflection didn't move when he turned his head. He remembered how the water stayed perfectly still that morning, as if satisfied. Years passed. Joseph found himself dreaming about Mirror Lake more often than he liked. About the way the water felt colder the deeper he went. About the pressure around his legs that didn't pull, didn't panic, just held. He woke some nights with the sound of water in his ears and the certainty that he'd forgotten something important. Not long ago, Joseph tried to look up the old incident reports from that summer, hoping distance and time might finally quiet the noise. Most of the records were gone. The few that remained listed a missing camper from that season. No photo, no follow-up, just a single name typed once and never mentioned again. Mark. Joseph doesn't remember a boy named Mark. What he does remember is the water closing over his head. The way it held him there without struggle. The way it let him go when it was finished. And sometimes, when he stands near still water for too long, his reflection lags just enough to make his chest tighten, like it's remembering something he hasn't. Maybe Mirror Lake didn't take a boy that summer. Maybe it gave one back. Some rules at summer camps aren't written down. They are never explained, only passed quietly from counselor to counselor, like everyone involved understands that asking why would be a mistake. This story came to us from a former teenage counselor we'll call Matthew, who spent one season working at a remote camp foothills of the Appalachian Mountains, an area steeped in old warnings about things that mimic human voices and lure people into the woods. He asked that his experience be shared exactly as he remembered it. This is his story, and he called it Don't Follow the Whistles. Pine Ridge Summer Camp sat in a shallow basin surrounded by dense hardwood forest, the kind where the trees grew close together and blocked out sound as easily as light. During the day, the woods felt ordinary, green, busy, alive with insects and birds. But at night, they pressed inward, swallowing noise until even footsteps felt muffled. The air cooled faster than it should have, carrying the damp scent of soil and decaying leaves. And once the sun went down, it always felt like the forest was holding its breath. On the first night of staff orientation, the head counselor went over the usual rules. Curfew, buddy system, flashlights after dark. Then, almost casually, she added one more. If you hear whistling after lights out, don't answer it. Don't follow it. Don't acknowledge it. She smiled as she said it, the way adults do when they expect laughter to follow. Someone joked that it was an old camp prank. Matthew laughed along with the others and didn't think about it again. The whistles started during the second week. At first, they were easy to dismiss. A single note drifting through the trees after a storm. Short, faint, like someone testing the air. Matthew assumed it was other counselors messing around or campers sneaking out past curfew, but the sound never came from the paths or the cabins. It always came from deeper in the woods, where the darkness thickened and the trees crowded together. The first time it truly unsettled him was during a late-night storm. Rain hammered the cabin roofs, thunder rolling low and constant, lightning flashing just often enough to freeze the forest in stark, broken shapes. While making his rounds, Matthew heard it clearly, a slow, deliberate whistle cutting through the rain, rising and falling in a pattern that felt intentional. Then the sound changed. The whistle stretched, softened, and turned into something else. A child crying, not loud, not panicked, just enough to trigger instinct. The sound came from the tree line behind the cabins, right where the floodlights stopped. Matthew felt his body lean toward it before his mind caught up. He took one step, then remembered the rule. He stood there, rain soaking through his jacket and listening as the crying stopped abruptly, like whoever was making it had realized it was being watched. The next morning, one of the younger campers was missing from roll call. They found him an hour later standing barefoot at the edge of the woods, mud streaked up his legs, his eyes glassy and unfocused. He couldn't explain how he'd gotten there. He only said he'd heard someone calling his name. His voice, but younger, higher. Wrong. After that, things escalated quickly. Campers began sleepwalking. Counselors found muddy footprints leading away from cabins, always toward the trees. Some nights the whistles multiplied, two notes overlapping, answering each other from different directions. Other times, the sound came from directly behind whoever was listening, close enough to feel in the chest rather than the ears. The woods felt crowded after dark, like something was repositioning itself just out of sight. Matthew started noticing patterns. The whistles never repeated the same tune twice. They mimicked whatever voice would work best. A camper's mother, a counselor's friend. Once, while locking up the rec hall, Matthew heard his own name spoken softly from the trees, in a voice identical to his own, down to the slight catch in his breathing. The sound made his stomach drop. He didn't respond. He didn't move. The voice repeated his name once more, closer this time, then dissolved into silence. The campers grew quieter as the season went on. Some refused to sleep in the windows. Others complained of dreams where things in the woods crept into the cabins and waking up to hot breath on their ear. One night, Matthew found shallow handprints smeared across a cabin window, fingers too long, the glass fogged from the outside in. No one claimed to have touched it. Nothing was done, nothing explained, and no one left. The worst night came near the end of the season. The storm rolled in without warning, clouds swallowing the moon and turning the camp into a maze of shadow and wet earth. Lightning flashed just long enough to reveal movement between the trees, tall, thin shapes shifting positions when no one was looking directly at them. While escorting campers back to their cabins, Matthew heard it again. Not whistling this time. Whispering. Multiple voices, overlapping, arguing softly, as if deciding which sound to use. Then one of the whistles came from inside the clearing. Too close enough to feel the vibration in his chest. Matthew turned toward the sound and saw something standing just beyond the floodlight's reach. Tall and pale, its outline blurred at the edges as if it couldn't quite decide on the shape. Lightning split the sky, and in that sudden white flash he saw its face, smooth and unfinished, features warped and shifting like a thing still learning how to wear them. In the same burst of light, its mouth opened just enough to reveal rows of sharp teeth glinting wet and white before the darkness rushed back in. Above its skull, gnarled antlers twisted outward, tangled and unnatural, curling like snakes caught in branches, their shapes lingering in his mind even after the thunder drowned out everything else. That was the night the counselor vanished. There was no scream, no struggle, just an empty bed at head count and a trail of disturbed leaves leading straight into the forest. Search crews combed the woods until morning. They found footprints that didn't match any known animal, spaced too far apart, too deliberate. The trail ended abruptly near a ravine, as if whatever had made them had simply stepped out of the world. Pine Ridge shut down the next day. Parents were told it was a staffing issue. Safety concerns about the lake being contaminated. The camp never reopened. The buildings were left to rot, the trails swallowed by brush, the clearing reclaimed by trees within a few short years. Matthew drove past the site once as an adult and barely recognized it. The woods had closed in completely, erasing almost every sign the camp had ever existed. But Matthew says he still hears the whistles, sometimes during storms when the rain blurs distance and sound, sometimes when the night is too quiet and the woods feel closer than they should. A single note drifts through the dark, followed by a voice that sounds almost like his own, calling softly, patiently, as if it already knows he's listening. He never answers, because he's certain of one thing now. Whatever learned how to call people out of the woods never stopped paying attention. It remembers the sound of his footsteps, the way he paused when he should have turned back. And it isn't calling just anyone anymore. It's waiting for him to finally follow the sound. fact or fiction? That's the question left behind when the campfires burn low and the cabins fall quiet. Creatures like the ones you heard tonight don't survive in stories because people pass them down for fun. They endure because someone, somewhere, encountered something in the woods they were never meant to see. Maybe these tales began as warnings shared between counselors, rules whispered after lights out, or shadows misinterpreted by tired eyes. Or maybe they started with real footsteps outside a cabin, real hands beneath the water, and real voices calling from the tree line long after curfew. We'll leave it to you to decide whether tonight's summer camp encounters were truth or the echoes of fear carried through sleepless nights beneath canvas roofs and wooden jigs. If you're drawn to camp legends, woodland creatures, eerie folklore, and scary stories that linger after the storm fades, then Whispers After Dark is where you belong. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and tell us in the comments which story made you think twice about stepping outside after dark. For now, we'll leave you with the sound of the rain moving through the trees. And as always, stay curious, stay cautious, and beware the whispers after dark.